Good morning, Dan and Amy. You ready? You ready to do June Carter's role?
Yeah, I'm ready.
June Carter Cash?
Uh-huh.
Because last night, Roy Moore was in Jackson. We got married in a fever, hotter than a pepper. Come on, this is the June Carter Cash part. Hotter than a pepper sprout.
Hotter than a pepper sprout.
We've been talking about Jackson ever since the fire went out.
We've been talking about Jackson ever since the fire went out.
I'm going to Jackson.
I'm going to Jackson.
I'm going to mess around.
Mess around?
No, talk sing it. You're not supposed to talk sing it like William Shatner. You're supposed to sing it. I'm supposed to talk sing like Johnny Cash because I can't sing.
Johnny Cash.
All right, we're going to have to workshop this.
Yeah, we're going
to.
You can't just surprise this stuff on me, Dan.
Roy Moore, not in Jackson, Tennessee, but of course Jackson, Alabama, campaigning, had this to say last night about the controversies that swirl around him.
I'm playing a little part in this scenario going on in the country. Obviously, I've made a few people mad. I'm the only one that can unite Democrats and Republicans. Because I seem to be opposed by both. They spent over $30 million to try to take me out. Why do you think I'm being harassed by media and by people pushing for allegations in the last 28 days of this election? Last 30 days it began. After 40-something years of fighting this battle, I'm now facing allegations. And that's all the press want to talk about. But I want to talk about the issues. I want to talk about where this country's going. And if we don't come back to God, we're not going anywhere.
All right. She's trying to spin out of it. The question is, will anybody, some of the insurgents out there, continue to support Roy Moore? I'm talking specifically about Steve Bannon. The initial reaction was to support, but there's some rumors and some reporting that suggests that Bannon is having tough talks with Roy Moore's inner circle, and if he believes that Roy Moore lied to him about these allegations, then Bannon has suggested, according to reports, unconfirmed from Bannon himself, that Bannon would bury Roy Moore himself. For more on this topic and also, remember the tax reform, we're pleased to be joined by Joel Pollak, senior editor-at-large at Breitbart News and author of the book See No Evil, 19 Hard Truths the Left Can't Handle. Joel, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning to my friends and family in Chicago.
Yeah, we miss you out here. And so what about Roy Moore and where you think your honcho, Steve Bannon, is vis-a-vis his candidacy at this point?
Well, I don't speak for Steve, and, I work at Breitbart News, and our job is separate from what Steve's doing on the political side. So, I'm not working with him on that, and I don't know what his views are. But certainly from a news perspective, this story in Alabama is fascinating, entertaining, and just a little bit disturbing. Mm-hmm. And every day seems to bring some new drama, and we're just trying to keep up with it.
Well, don't you have reporters in Alabama trying to verify these ladies' claims?
We have reporters trying to figure out what's going on. I think that the accuser who came out Monday certainly seems credible from her allegations. I think the yearbook that appears to have Roy Moore's handwriting in it was a fairly convincing piece of evidence. And so you don't really have the same questions that arose last week when the Washington Post story came out, when they had a serious allegation of molestation of an underage woman wrapped in other stories about what appeared at the time to be legal relationships, at least, with younger women. So we're starting to get a picture of Roy Moore that apparently was familiar to people in the town where he worked, but had never been written about before in any serious way. At the same time, you also have the sense that this is also coming so late in the election cycle that voters didn't have a chance to consider this during the primary when Republicans, for example, might have picked a different candidate. So there's a degree of resentment towards the Washington Post, toward the media who are bringing this up now. And people are also wondering, I think naturally, why the women didn't come forward for 40 years. That doesn't mean they're not telling the truth, but it does, I think, frustrate people who would have liked to have had this information earlier. if indeed this information checks out. So I think it's a difficult situation for the Republican Party. I don't see any real way out other than to let the voters decide. And, in fairness, I think the Democrat, Doug Jones, deserves a crack at it. I mean, he's organized his campaign. He's running. I think the problem he's facing is, first of all, the fact that Alabama is just a deep red state. I think, where I live in California, certainly in my own hometown and home state of Illinois, the phenomenon of convicted criminals, or at least criminals under investigation, being reelected to office is not unknown. People are so partisan that they'll simply pull the lever for the party regardless. But the other problem is Doug Jones is so far to the left. It used to be that Democrats would run socially conservative candidates in red districts, but they don't seem to be doing that anymore, especially because the party's moved so far left on social issues. So you've got a candidate who basically has a far left view on abortion, for example, so it's harder for Republicans to say, well, I'll just sit this one out, or I'll just go for the Democrat this time because he doesn't seem like such a bad guy. The parties are so polarized that decisions that used to be fairly easy and normal are becoming more difficult for people to make.
McConnell seemed to indicate he'd like Jeff Sessions to go run a write-in campaign for his old seat. There was also some suggestion that maybe Roy Moore would, his path to victory at this point is to say, I'm going to win and resign so that the seat is held for Republicans and the governor can make an appointment, but I won't serve, particularly since he's facing expulsion from the Senate that's being telegraphed by more than 2/3 of the senators at this point. But it's, obviously Moore is defiant at this juncture. Do you see either of those two options as viable or smart?
Well, I think it would be wrong to say they're impossible. I think nothing's impossible, we've learned. But I don't think those are good options. I think any option that takes the choice away from the voters of Alabama is going to be resented, not just in Alabama, but more broadly. And I think the leaders in the Senate, although they want to minimize the damage to the Republican Party, if they do anything like expelling him from the Senate, they're going to trigger a nationwide revolt among the Republican voter base, whether the charges against Roy Moore are valid or not. Probably the only person who could force some kind of a change in the situation is the president. But he's been fortunate enough to be out of town for almost the entire duration of this scandal, and his approval rating has gone up since he's been out of town and looking good on the world stage. So I'm not sure he's in a hurry to jump into Alabama politics. My suspicion is that the White House is basically just going to say this is something for Alabamians to decide, and they're going to focus on tax reform. So I think that the circus in Alabama is going to go on. It's going to be very uncomfortable for the Republican Party. The Democrats don't really get off scot-free either, though. Yesterday you had Representative Jackie Spear of California testifying that there are sexual harassment scandals in the Congress involving both parties, and that Congress had paid out, or the House of Representatives had paid out $15 million over the last decade or so to accusers. So this is looking like a bipartisan problem. I'm not sure that Democrats are able to isolate it, especially here in California, where the state legislature is dominated by Democrats. There's a huge sexual harassment scandal going on. So
as there is burgeoning in Illinois, which I'm sure comes as no surprise to you. Yeah.
Right. And then, Democrats, I think, might benefit anyway, because if voters who are outraged by this behavior in Congress come out to the polls, they're going to vote against the party in power. So I think it's looking grim for Republicans no matter what happens in Alabama. And the hope that Republicans have to have is that they deliver on enough of the issues that their own voters come out and say, look, we're finally happy with the job you're doing and want to keep you there. But this is all brewing up to be a huge anti-incumbency election in 2018.
Well, speaking of taxes that you just mentioned, there's a new plan to get rid of the Obamacare mandate. Is that going to hinder progress or any type of tax reform or before the Christmas break?
What I'm hearing is that the people who opposed Obamacare repeal, both in the big version and the skinny version, people like John McCain, they're not going to get in the way this time. That's what I'm hearing. And that's probably because the individual mandate is very unpopular, and it's not seen as providing directly for Americans who are in need, who don't have another way of affording their health insurance. It's simply seen as a fee or a tax, a burden on the taxpayer. And I think repealing it gives Republicans one way to say to their voters, look, at least got rid of the unconstitutional part of Obamacare, or the part that's most constitutionally problematic. And it opened the door then to bipartisan solutions of the type that have been discussed by Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray on the Democratic side to try to fix the mess that Obamacare has created in the health insurance markets. Most people don't really have time to think about the broader issues and the philosophical issues about how we should create a healthcare system. Most people are just trying to pay the bills, and the fact that the Obamacare bill just keeps going up year after year is something people want addressed right away.
I've got an idea how you can really fire tax reform through the Senate and be done with it. Just have Roy Moore come out and oppose it. So if he opposes it, then everybody will sign on to it. You know what I mean? You see what I'm doing there?
Yeah, and it's just interesting that the election in Alabama has really avoided issues the last week or so. It's really coming down to a kind of death match between Washington and grassroots, or at least this idea of the Washington establishment versus the people. And the one lesson I think you can take away from it, no matter what the result is in 4 weeks, is that the Washington establishment is so disliked that Alabama is actually seriously considering electing Roy Moore in spite of all the allegations. They're sending a message to Washington that they're deeply unhappy with the job that congressional leaders are doing.
Well, and to your point about the party in power being likely to suffer the most, one of the things it seems to me Republicans could do to get out ahead of this sexual harassment stuff, like Congresswoman Spire was testifying to yesterday, is change the rules. They have special rules in terms of how the process accusers have to go through to lodge a complaint against a member of Congress as compared to ordinary civilians, more kind of ruling class stuff. Under a law in place since 95, and the Washington Post had reported on this, accusers can only file lawsuits if they first agree to go through months of counseling and mediation, and then you have a special congressional office charged with trying to resolve these cases out of court per the $15 million worth of settlements. So that's not what the ordinary citizen, that's not the consideration the ordinary citizen gets, or the hoops that you have to go through against an ordinary citizen, but you do a member of Congress, and that strikes me as wrong.
Right, and keep in mind that when you are known in Washington to have complained about something like that, it's very hard to get hired again. Staffers in Congress depend on referrals to move from one job to the next. And if they have brought a complaint against a member of Congress, they're viewed as a troublemaker. So this entire system in D.C. has been designed to protect incumbents. And look, that's another problem that the Republicans have when they try to deal with Roy Moore. Roy Moore can stand up and say, who are you to judge me? You guys have a separate system. I mean, last week the Senate passed a resolution for all members to go through sexual harassment sensitivity training. Last week, I mean, Roy Moore can say, you're basically in no position to judge anybody. Right. And the Senate would probably have to admit that. And the House is now also facing some of the same stuff. So I think that if there's a silver lining to any of this stuff going on in Alabama, it's that this scandal is finally going to blow open on Capitol Hill. With Jackie Spear coming forward, she didn't name names, but I think there's going to be some deep introspection and maybe even public hearings, pressure for the House at least and the Senate to hold hearings so that some of this behavior can be brought to light and so they can change the way things are done.
He is Joel Pollak, senior editor-at-large at Breitbart News and author of the book See No Evil, 19 Hard Truths the Left Can't Handle. Joel, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're